After a group of Indian men staged an amazing escape from the soul-crushing conditions of a migrant labor camp in Mississippi, what did they do to try to stop it from happening again? In part 3 of our interview with the author of The Great Escape, Saket Soni describes the defeats and the victories the men faced after breaking free. Hi, it's Paul from HEC Books. Welcome, and if you're new to our channel, make sure to click the subscribe button. Now, once again, let's hear from author Saket Soni. If their temporary visas had expired, they left the shelter, so to speak, of the man camp on this long, very public march. Why weren't they just deported? Because they were undocumented. They had no reason to be here legally at that point, right?
Well, they almost were deported. If the immigration agents working against them had their way, the men would have been deported. But understand the reason they would have been deported, which was to execute an extraordinary cover-up for the central crime that was at stake. You know, you can't have in the 21st century companies, and not just small mom and shop companies that are unlicensed, fly by night, one van and 2 lawnmowers. We're not talking about that kind of company. We're talking about a major private equity owned oil rig builder, which is enormously profitable for its executives, for the shareholders of the private equity firm that owns it. I mean, enormously profitable company, right? We can't have companies like that bringing in workers from other companies, from other countries, trafficking in workers, enslaving them, subjecting them to human trafficking and forced labor as a way of getting ahead. I mean, what honest company could do business if this is a fine way to make a profit? You just can't reward these bad actors. And that was why it was incredibly important for the workers to stay in the U.S., and bring this company to justice. That's what they eventually did. Beyond that, these are also victims of trafficking. I mean, we have laws in this country that allow workers who have been trafficked to the U.S. to stay for the course of the investigation and then get humanitarian visas if they choose to stay past that. They've given up because of false promises or fraud or coercion. They've given up their foothold in Indian life or wherever they come from. They're now here, and they spent a time building up the United States. They took the courageous step of coming forward to report this crime at great risk to themselves. And so they deserve to belong in the United States. And that's something eventually the U.S. government agreed to and happily granted them visas.
Just out of curiosity, once they all walked off the job and this oil rig company had all these oil rigs that they were making millions of dollars building, what did they do to get people to continue to do the work? Surely they didn't go back to India and bring more people over.
Yeah, they had a very bad day. A very bad
Just
day.
one?
They had a series of very bad days. Yeah, they were right in the middle of production for extraordinarily, high-value customers. They couldn't deliver, right? Then their reputation sank and sank. Eventually, after a federal jury found them responsible for having trafficked these workers and subjecting them to forced labor, the company basically, sold off its assets, declared bankruptcy. The same company, the same people in that company reconstituted under a new name. So they weren't quite brought to justice, but I like to think that many, many companies around, across the Gulf Coast got the message that this is not how you can do business in America.
Well, beyond approaching the government, then there was a civil suit as well. And we'll just leave it there so that people have a good reason to read the book and find out what the ending is. But beyond that, I guess the epilogue would be that with more and more natural disasters, presumably as a result of climate change, more and more of these companies are going to be bringing in migrant workers to do this kind of work. That's what your organization does, is police this now. Are there any better protections in place now? Because this was only 15 years ago when this all started.
This was recent, yeah. And since Katrina, disasters have become more frequent and more destructive. Katrina was supposed to have been a once-in-a-100-year flood. And since then, there have been over $200 billion disasters. And what we found is those same workers like these, who rebuilt the Gulf Coast after Hurricane Katrina, have been rebuilding year after year in different places. What I didn't know when I met these workers, that they were the first of a growing and now permanent workforce that exists in the United States that we call resilience workers. These are people who rebuild homes and schools and cities. They follow hurricanes, floods, and fires. When disasters come, workers follow disasters. And I and my team follow the workers. We're with an organization called Resilience Force. And our mission is to protect the workers, but also help them complete what they started, complete the repairs of American cities so that people can come home. It's a growing industry in the age of climate change. And yes, conditions are improving because we've got, firstly, partners in government now. We have the most extraordinary Department of Labor in many generations. We've got a group of leaders among the workers, people who've been in this workforce now over a dozen years, people who've rebuilt after a dozen or more hurricanes. And so they've become leaders of the workforce. And then, happily, there are good companies that are coming forward and saying, look, we need these workers. We need to do right by them so that they stay in the industry, so that we can get these contracts and complete the work.
By way of wrapping up, I want to end sort of where we began with you studying theater. I'm wondering if any of that came into play during any of this. If some of your background is, producing theater to motivate people, to make people think, had anything to do with, having marches and hunger strikes and even writing the book.
Yeah, well, theater came in handy. And I really learned through theater that you have to be telling a story. That's much more important than making a point. If you tell a good story and you tell it scenically, people come on stage and they have opposing, desires and intentions, and they fight it out and they move a story forward. Then you've got an audience. Then you've got people, who want to stay with you. And that was really important during the campaign. That was a David versus Goliath story, if there ever was one. Workers born in penury in India, some of whom worked $1 a day, arriving in the United States up against a leader in the oil rig business, a leader in the oil industry. And that's a David versus Goliath story. I had the good fortune then of being able to tell that story all over again in a much deeper way in this book. And yeah, theater came in handy again. The other thing that came in handy was my friend Rajan and the lessons he gave me in cooking. All those cooking lessons helped the campaign, but they also helped the book. There's a lot of food in the book that kind of enlivens the book, and I hope that's another reason to read.
Well, maybe if they turn it into a movie someday, you could direct it. It would make a great movie.
We'll see. I appreciate that. Thank you.
Heard it here first.
Thank you.
The book is absolutely marvelous, and what you're doing for labor in this country and
Thank
for
you. I
migrant
so appreciate
laborers is tremendous.
Thank
the
you.
book is The Great Escape. Saket Soni, thanks so much for being with us.
So appreciate being here. Thank you so much.
Thanks again for joining us today. Don't forget to like this video and subscribe for new content.